I had always thought of our marriage as solid, if not perfect. Rachel and I met during college at a charity event, where she worked tirelessly to organize everything. Her boundless optimism was captivating, and her kindness pulled me in like a magnet. I never imagined that the very traits that made me fall in love with her could someday turn into a double-edged sword. When our first child was born, we went through the usual challenges of young parents: sleepless nights, endless bills, and the constant juggle between work and home life. But Rachel seemed unstoppable. She prepared school lunches, joined every PTA meeting, and still managed to work part-time as a nurse. I did my best to support her, but my job at a local car dealership often left me drained and absent. As the years went by, small cracks started to appear in our relationship. Rachel became more and more distant, burying herself in her role as a caregiver, not just for our children, but for anyone who needed her. While I admired her selflessness, it often felt like her endless compassion came at the cost of our connection. Conversations between us grew shorter. Our dates became increasingly rare, and the laughter that once filled our home seemed to fade into the background. 2 years ago, I noticed a subtle but alarming change. Rachel began staying late after her nursing shifts, saying she needed to help patients or finish paperwork. At first, I didn't think much of it. She had always been dedicated to her work. But soon, she started coming home with a far-off look in her eyes, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I tried bringing it up several times, suggesting we go to counseling or take a weekend trip to reconnect. Each time, Rachel dismissed my concerns with the same explanation: "It's just a busy time at work. Things will calm down soon." I wanted to believe her, but deep down, I knew that wasn't the whole truth. The turning point came a week ago when Rachel casually mentioned a friend from work, a younger man named Bryce, who had recently lost his wife in a tragic accident. She spoke of him with such warmth and empathy that it struck a nerve, even though I told myself it was just her natural kindness. Yet the doubt gnawed at me. It wasn't until last night that my worst fears were confirmed and my world came crashing down. I woke up with a splitting headache and stumbled into the bathroom to find some painkillers. As I crouched by the sink, memories of the previous evening came flooding back with an almost unbearable clarity. My name is Alan Miller, and yesterday my wife Rachel shattered my entire world with a confession that left me reeling. When I got home from work, Rachel was waiting for me, unusually quiet. Then, with tears in her eyes, she admitted that she had been seeing someone else. Bryce, the man from work. It had started a year ago, she explained, as an effort to comfort him in his grief. Over time, their connection deepened into something much more intimate. Though she insisted she still loved me, she confessed that she had developed deep feelings for Bryce as well. What came next shocked me even more. Rachel told me she wasn't planning to leave me or our family, but she felt obligated to stay with Bryce until he no longer needed her. She claimed it was only temporary, but she wanted to maintain her role as a wife and mother while continuing her relationship with him. According to her, Bryce was younger and would eventually move on, but until then she couldn't abandon him. I was furious. I lashed out at her, calling her names I'm not proud of, and accused her of betraying everything we'd built together. Rachel didn't back down, though. She argued that if I truly loved her, I would understand her decision and let her do what she felt was right. When I asked how she'd feel if the roles were reversed, her response was a dagger to my heart. "Who'd want you?" she said, eyeing my balding head and the extra weight I'd gained over the years. Then she coldly warned that a divorce would ruin me financially and emotionally. In a rage, I turned to alcohol to numb the pain, and after hours of yelling and tears, Rachel packed a bag and left to stay at Bryce's house. That night, as I stared at our empty bedroom, I realized I couldn't let her betrayal destroy me completely. I needed to take control, for myself and for our children. The next morning, I began to form a plan. I called my boss and requested some time off to get my life back in order. He recommended a good divorce attorney, Dwight Carter, and assured me help in any way he could. With Dwight's guidance, I started to piece together the steps I needed to protect myself and my kids from further damage. Rachel returned briefly that afternoon to drop the kids off and pack more of her belongings. When I demanded to know where our children had spent the night, she casually admitted that they'd stayed at Bryce's house. The audacity of her decision left me speechless. But I knew one thing: this wasn't over. She said, "That evening, as I sat alone in the kitchen, I began to take stock of my situation. Rachel's betrayal had flipped my entire world upside down. But I wasn't going to let her actions define the rest of my life. I thought about our children. Ethan, 16, who lived and breathed football. Chloe, 14, the fiercely independent honor student. And Jake, 10, our surprise baby, whose cheerful personality could brighten any room. They needed me to be strong, even if I didn't feel it yet. The next morning, I met with Dwight Carter in his office. He was a no-nonsense man in his late 30s with sharp eyes and an even sharper mind. I laid out everything that had happened, from Rachel's confession to her taking the kids to Bryce's house. Dwight didn't sugarcoat anything. "This is going to be messy," he said, leaning back in his chair. "But you've got a good case here. If Rachel continues prioritizing this other man over her responsibilities as a mother, that'll work in your favor." I nodded, feeling a flicker of hope for the first time in days. What do I need to do? First, keep a detailed record of everything. Every conversation, every incident, every decision she makes that puts your kids in a bad position. Second, you'll need to stabilize your home. Judges like to see that the kids have a steady environment, so make sure their routines aren't disrupted. I left his office with a list of tasks and a renewed sense of purpose. The next few weeks were going to be tough, but I was determined to protect my family. The first order of business was to talk to Rachel's parents. Over the years, her father, Tom, and I had bonded over our shared love of classic cars. I hoped he might help me make sense of what was happening. Tom and his wife, Linda, greeted me warmly when I showed up unannounced at their house. I didn't hold back, explaining everything. Rachel's confession, her relationship with Bryce, and the impact it was having on the kids. Tom's face turned red with anger as he listened. Holland supposed, although she said most people refuse to face any kind of grief even for a little while. "She took the kids to another man's house?" he roared. "That's not the Rachel we raised?" Linda looked heartbroken but remained calm. "We'll talk to her," she promised. "Whatever happens, Alan, we're here for you and the kids." "Yes." Linda smiled. Their support was a relief, but it didn't make the situation any less painful. That night, as I sat down with the kids to help with homework, I vowed to give them as much normalcy as possible. Ethan asked if I'd come to his next football game, and I promised I wouldn't miss it. Chloe mentioned a science fair project she was excited about, and Jake asked if we could go to the park over the weekend. For the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope, and my kids were my anchor, and I wouldn't let Rachel's choices take them away from me. True to Dwight's advice, I started keeping a journal of everything Rachel did. When she stopped by to pick up more clothes, I noted the time and her demeanor. When she called to tell me she'd be late dropping the kids off after school, I wrote that down too. Every detail mattered. I also began preparing financially. Dwight suggested freezing our joint accounts to prevent Rachel from withdrawing large sums of money. "It's not uncommon in cases like this," he explained. "People panic and make bad decisions." Rachel, of course, was furious when she found out. She stormed into the house one evening, yelling about how I was trying to control her. I stayed calm, repeating the same line, "I'm protecting myself and the kids." As our legal battle took shape, I found myself growing stronger. Every step I took felt like reclaiming a part of my life that Rachel's betrayal had threatened to take away. One afternoon, while cleaning out the garage, I stumbled upon a box of old photos and keepsakes Rachel had packed away years ago. Among them was a journal. Curious, I flipped through it, hoping to find answers to questions I didn't even know how to ask. What I found shocked me. In the entries, Rachel had written about her struggles with motherhood, her feelings of inadequacy, and her fears of losing herself in the role of wife and mother. There was no mention of Bryce, but the loneliness and frustration she described felt all too familiar. For a moment, my anger softened. Rachel's betrayal still hurt, but for the first time, I saw the cracks in our marriage from her perspective. I wasn't sure what to do with this newfound understanding, but it stayed with me. The weeks turned into months and our legal battle intensified. Rachel continued to see Bryce, but her visits to the kids became less frequent. Ethan's football games, Chloe's science fair, Jake's laughter. She was missing it all. The kids started to notice too. One evening, Ethan came to me after dinner. I didn't know how to answer. "She's going through some things right now," I said carefully. "But that doesn't mean she doesn't love you." Ethan nodded, but I could see the hurt in his eyes. I knew then that I wasn't just fighting for custody. I was fighting to preserve the parts of our family that still worked, the parts Rachel seemed to have forgotten. Rachel's absence became more pronounced as time went on. While I did my best to shield the kids from the tension, their questions grew harder to answer. Chloe, ever the bold one, finally asked during dinner, "Dad, why does Mom spend so much time with that other guy?" Does she not want to be here anymore? Her words cut deep, but I tried to remain composed. Your mom is trying to figure some things out, I said, carefully choosing my words. But that doesn't change how much she loves you. Jake, sitting quietly next to his sister, whispered, But why doesn't she love you anymore, Dad? For a moment I couldn't speak. The weight of their confusion and pain was overwhelming, but I knew I had to be the strong one. That's a question only she can answer, I said finally, but I promise, no matter what happens, I will always be here for you. That night, after the kids had gone to bed, I sat in the living room, staring at the dim glow of the TV. My mind raced with memories of the life Rachel and I had built together. I knew I couldn't undo the past, but I could fight for the future. For my kids. For my own self-respect. My next meeting with Dwight was a game-changer. Armed with my meticulous journal and the recordings of Rachel's erratic behavior, he began laying the groundwork for a strong custody case. The fact that she's spending significant time with Bryce while neglecting her parental duties is going to weigh heavily in your favor, he said. We need to show the court that you're the stable, reliable parent. Dwight also suggested hiring a private investigator to gather additional evidence. At first, the idea felt intrusive, but I realized it was necessary. If Rachel's behavior endangered the kids' emotional well-being, I needed proof to ensure their safety. Meanwhile, I worked on improving myself. I started exercising regularly, eating better, and even joined a local support group for fathers going through similar struggles. Slowly but surely, I began to feel more like myself again. The kids noticed, too. Dad, you're looking good, Ethan said one evening, giving me a playful punch on the arm. Are you trying to impress someone? I laughed, grateful for the levity. Just trying to keep up with you, I said. But deep down, I knew this transformation wasn't just for them. It was for me. One rainy evening, Rachel showed up at the house unannounced. She looked tired, her eyes shadowed with guilt. Alan, can we talk? She asked. I hesitated, but let her in. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where we'd shared countless meals and conversations over the years. For a moment, neither of us spoke. I miss the kids, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. And I miss us. The two women smiled separately as they recovered. Her words stirred a mix of emotions. Anger, sadness, hope. You've missed more than just the kids, Rachel, I said, my tone firm but calm. You've missed games, school events, moments they'll never get back. Tears welled up in her eyes. I know. I've made so many mistakes. For the first time, I saw a crack in the wall of self-justification she'd built around herself. But I couldn't let her off the hook so easily. Why now, Rachel? What's changed? I swallowed hard and moved my lips back and forth. She hesitated, then admitted, Bryce, he doesn't need me anymore. He's moving on. And I realized I've been so focused on helping him that I lost sight of everything else. Her admission felt like both a victory and a slap in the face. So now that he's done with you, you want to come back? I asked, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. Rachel flinched, but didn't argue. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, she said, but I want to try. For the kids. For us. After Rachel left that night, I stayed up late, wrestling with my emotions. Part of me wanted to believe her, to hope that we could somehow rebuild what had been broken. But another part of me knew that trust, once shattered, isn't easily restored. The next morning I called Dwight to update him. Do you think she's serious about wanting to fix things, he asked. I don't know, I admitted. But I owe it to the kids to at least hear her out, said Langer. Dwight didn't discourage me but reminded me to proceed cautiously. If she's truly committed, you'll see it in her actions, not just her words. Rachel began making an effort to reconnect with the kids. She showed up to Ethan's football game, helped Chloe with her science project, and even spent an afternoon playing board games with Jake. The kids were thrilled to have her back, but I couldn't shake the nagging doubt in my mind. Over time, Rachel and I began talking more, tentatively at first, then with more openness. She started seeing a therapist, which Dwight recommended as a sign of good faith. Slowly, I allowed her to spend more time at the house, though I made it clear that things couldn't simply go back to the way they were. One evening, after the kids had gone to bed, Rachel and I sat on the porch, watching the stars. I don't expect you to forgive me, she said quietly, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make things right. Her sincerity was disarming, but I knew it would take more than words to heal the wounds she'd caused. We'll see, I said, but this time, it's on my terms. As the days turned into weeks, I began to see glimpses of the woman I'd fallen in love with so many years ago. Whether that would be enough to rebuild our marriage remained to be seen, but for the first time in a long time, I felt a sliver of hope. Rachel's return, though cautious, brought a complicated mix of emotions. On one hand, the kids were overjoyed to have her more present, and for their sake, I couldn't help but feel some relief. On the other hand, trust was a fragile thing, and the chasm between us was still wide. Bob. One night, during one of her therapy sessions, I decided to dig deeper into my own emotions. I signed up for a session with a counselor recommended by Dwight. Sitting across from a calm, empathetic woman named Dr. Harper, I finally began to articulate the storm of feelings that had been consuming me. I want to forgive her, I admitted, my voice faltering. But every time I look at her, I remember what she did. How do you move past that? Dr. Harper leaned forward slightly, her gaze steady. Forgiveness isn't about forgetting, Alan. It's about deciding whether the relationship is worth rebuilding despite the hurt. But forgiveness has to be earned, not given away freely. What's more important is whether you feel Rachel's actions align with her words. Her words stuck with me long after I left her office. Forgiveness wasn't a switch I could flip. It was a choice I'd have to make, one that depended as much on Rachel's commitment as it did on my own willingness to trust again. Rachel's efforts to repair the damage didn't go unnoticed. She took small but meaningful steps, like showing up for every family dinner, helping with the kids' activities, and even picking up extra shifts at work to contribute financially. It wasn't perfect, and there were moments when her presence felt more like an obligation than genuine love. But there were other times when the old Rachel, my Rachel, shone through. One weekend, she surprised the kids with a trip to the nearby amusement park. Chloe laughed as Rachel screamed her way through a roller coaster, and Jake clung to her during the log ride. Even Ethan, who had been skeptical about her intentions, seemed to soften. Watching them together stirred something inside me, a reminder of the family we used to be. That night, after we put the kids to bed, Rachel lingered in the kitchen. "Thank you for letting me do this," she said softly. "I know I have a long way to go, but I'm trying, Alan. I really am." For the first time in months, I saw something I hadn't dared to hope for: sincerity. But sincerity alone wasn't enough. "You've got to keep showing up, Rachel," I said. "Not just for them. For me too." Just as I began to entertain the possibility of reconciliation, life threw another curveball. One evening, while cleaning out an old filing cabinet, I found an envelope tucked behind some bills. Inside were several handwritten letters. Letters. From Bryce to Rachel. My hands trembled as I read the first one. The words were intimate, filled with longing and emotion. It was clear that their relationship had been more than just a fleeting affair. Bryce had been in love with her, and, judging by her responses, she had felt the same way. But what caught my attention most was the final letter, dated just weeks before Rachel had confessed to me. In it, Bryce wrote about how he was ready to make it official and start a life with her. The letter ended abruptly, with Rachel's handwriting scribbled in the margin. "This isn't what I want. I need to fix things at home." I sat there stunned. Had Rachel really ended things with Bryce because she wanted to repair our marriage? Or was it simply because Bryce had been ready for more than she was willing to give? That night I waited for Rachel to come home from work. When she walked through the door, I held up the letters. Her face turned pale. "Where did you find those?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "They were in the filing cabinet," I said, keeping my tone steady. "Why didn't you tell me about these?" Rachel sat down at the table, her hands shaking. "I didn't think they mattered anymore. I ended things with Bryce before I even told you about the affair." "Well," I asked, my voice breaking, "why did you end it?" Anita sighed. She looked up at me, tears streaming down her face. "Because I realized I didn't want him. I wanted us, but I didn't know how to fix what I'd broken." Her words hung in the air, heavy with emotion. Part of me wanted to believe her, but the scars of her betrayal ran deep. "You should have told me," I said finally. "You should have been honest from the start." But I couldn't ask her to tell. "I know," she whispered, "and I'll regret that for the rest of my life." The revelation of the letters left me at a crossroads. Rachel's actions, both past and present, painted a complicated picture. She had betrayed me, yes, but she was also trying, truly trying, to make amends. The question was whether I could let go of the pain enough to meet her halfway. I decided to take things one day at a time. I told Rachel that while I wasn't ready to forgive her fully, I was open to the idea of rebuilding, slowly. But this has to be a two-way street, I said. If I'm putting in the effort, you have to meet me there. I will, she promised. Whatever it takes. The weeks that followed were some of the hardest of my life. Rachel and I attended counseling together, where we unpacked years of resentment and miscommunication. There were setbacks, of course, moments when the pain felt too fresh, too overwhelming to overcome. But there were also moments of hope, like when Rachel apologized to Ethan for missing his games, or when she surprised Chloe with tickets to a science exhibit she'd been excited about. For the first time in a long time, it felt like we were moving forward, not as the couple we used to be, but as something new. Whether that would be enough to save our marriage remained uncertain, but for now, it was enough to keep trying. For a few minutes, his mouth seemed close enough to touch hers. As the weeks turned into months, Rachel's efforts to rebuild trust began to show results. She was consistent in her actions, attending therapy, spending quality time with the kids, and making an active effort to communicate openly with me. It wasn't easy. There were still nights when I lay awake, haunted by memories of her betrayal, questioning whether we could truly overcome the damage. "Who is it?" I asked. "Bryce," she admitted, holding up the phone. "I haven't heard from him since." Everything. I tensed, my mind racing with possibilities. What does he want? She handed me the phone. "I haven't read it yet. You can see for yourself." I hesitated, then opened the message. It was brief but pointed. "I just wanted to thank you for everything you did for me. I know I hurt you by asking too much, but I'll always care about you. I hope you're doing well." I handed the phone back to her, my chest tight. "Are you going to respond?" "No," she said firmly, deleting the message without hesitation. "I don't want anything to do with him anymore." Her actions spoke volumes, but the incident left me uneasy. It was a reminder of how close we had come to losing everything, and how easily the past could creep back in. Despite the setback, Rachel continued to make strides in repairing our relationship. We started going on small outings together, coffee dates while the kids were at school, walks in the park on quiet Sunday mornings. At first it felt awkward, like we were two strangers trying to reconnect, but gradually the walls between us began to come down. One afternoon, as we sat at a cafe near the dealership where I worked, Rachel reached for my hand. "Do you ever think about how we used to be?" she asked. "All the time," I admitted. "But I also think about how we stopped trying. We both let things slide, Rachel. It wasn't just you." "Oh," she nodded, her eyes downcast. "I wish I could go back and fix it all." "We can't go back," I said gently, "but maybe we can start over." Her eyes met mine, and for the first time, I saw a glimmer of hope. Hope. That maybe, just maybe, we could rebuild something new. While Rachel and I worked on our marriage, the kids began to voice their feelings more openly. Ethan, ever the protective older brother, pulled me aside one evening after dinner. "Dad," he said, his voice low, "do you really think Mom's going to stay this time?" "I think she's trying," I replied honestly, "but it's going to take time." He nodded, his expression serious. "She hurt you." "I don't know if I can forget that." "You don't have to forget," I said, "but forgiving her might make things easier. For all of us." Chloe, on the other hand, was more forgiving. She seemed eager to have her mother back in the fold, often dragging Rachel into her world of science projects and teenage drama. Jake, being the youngest, clung to Rachel with unbridled joy, his cheerful innocence a balm for all of us. He smiled at me, watching with Eliza's eyes fixed on mine. Seeing the kids interact with her gave me hope that our family, though fractured, could still heal. One evening, Rachel surprised me with a heartfelt gesture. She had spent weeks secretly restoring an old scrapbook we had started during our early years of marriage. Filled with photos, ticket stubs, and handwritten notes, it was a testament to the life we had built together. "I found this in the attic," she said, handing it to me. "I thought maybe we could add to it." Flipping through the pages, I felt a wave of nostalgia and sadness, but also gratitude. "Thank you," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "We've still got a lot to work on," she said, "but I want us to keep building. Together." As spring approached, Rachel and I made the decision to attend couples therapy together. The sessions were difficult, forcing us to confront our shared failures and communicate in ways we hadn't in years. But they also gave us tools to move forward, strategies for resolving conflict, fostering intimacy, and rebuilding trust. One of the breakthroughs came during a session where we discussed our expectations for the future. "I don't just want to repair the damage," Rachel said. "I want us to be better than we were before." Hearing her say that ignited something in me. For the first time, I felt like we were truly on the same page. In late spring, Rachel and I revisited the counselor who had been helping us navigate our journey. Dr. Harper had posed a pivotal question. What does forgiveness look like to each of you? For Rachel, forgiveness meant the chance to prove her commitment without being constantly judged for her past mistakes. For me, it meant finding peace with the hurt and allowing myself to embrace the possibility of a future together. We left that session with a sense of clarity. Forgiveness wouldn't be a singular moment. It would be a series of choices made day by day as we worked to rebuild our lives. As summer arrived, life in our household felt more stable than it had in a long time. Rachel and I had found a rhythm, balancing work, the kids, and our renewed focus on rebuilding our relationship. There were still tough moments, but the progress we had made gave me hope that we were moving in the right direction. Ethan's football season wrapped up with a big win, and Rachel's cheers from the sidelines seemed to mend something in him. Chloe won first place at her school's science fair, beaming as Rachel and I stood together, clapping louder than anyone else. Jake, as usual, kept us grounded with his endless questions and infectious laughter. Yet, through it all, I knew the ultimate question loomed. Could I fully forgive Rachel and open my heart again, or would the weight of her betrayal always stand between us? One evening, Rachel approached me with an idea. "Alan," she began, "I think we need to do something symbolic. Something to put the past behind us." "What do you mean?" I asked. She hesitated, then pulled out the old scrapbook she had restored months earlier. "Let's start fresh," she said. "We can fill this with new memories, proof that we've chosen to rebuild, not just for the kids but for ourselves." The idea was simple yet profound. It wasn't about erasing the past, but creating a future worth cherishing. "Okay," I agreed. "But it has to be honest. No pretending everything's perfect." "Agreed," she said with a small smile. "We'll build it day by day." Rachel and I decided to hold a small, private ceremony in our backyard. It wasn't anything elaborate, just the two of us, standing under the oak tree where we used to sit and dream about our future when we first bought the house. We wrote letters to each other, pouring out everything we had been holding back, the pain, the regrets, and the hopes for what might still be possible. When it was my turn to read, I paused, my voice trembling. "I forgive you, Rachel," I said finally, "not because I've forgotten what happened, but because I want us to move forward. I want to believe that we can be better. Not perfect, but better." Tears streamed down her face as she took my hand. "I'll spend the rest of my life proving to you that you made the right choice," she whispered. Together we buried our letters in a small wooden box beneath the oak tree, a gesture meant to symbolize leaving the past behind. The months that followed felt like a second chance at life. Rachel and I worked hard to rebuild not only our relationship but also our individual selves. She continued her therapy, and I kept up my support group meetings. We learned to communicate more openly, to address issues before they became cracks in our foundation. The kids flourished in the stability of our renewed family dynamic. Ethan seemed more at ease, Chloe confided in Rachel more often, and Jake's laughter filled the house again. Our family wasn't perfect, but it was healing. 1 year after Rachel's confession, we celebrated our wedding anniversary in a quiet, heartfelt way. Instead of going out, we stayed home with the kids, watching old family videos and sharing stories about the early days of our marriage. As the night wound down, Rachel and I sat on the porch, sipping wine and watching the stars. She turned to me, her eyes reflecting the dim light. "You think we're going to make it, Alan?" She had smiled and said, "I think we're going to make it." "Come holding your handkerchief." I smiled, the answer coming more easily than I'd expected. "We already are." The journey wasn't over, but we had chosen to walk it together, and for now, that was enough.